Welcome to the third and final session of this unit. Let's look at some more simple examples to spot gaps in reasoning structure. I think Cheteshwar has been our best batsman this season. He has the highest batting average. The point here is that Cheteshwar is the best batsman. The reason in support is that he has the highest batting average. What is the gap in reasoning here? Does a high batting average automatically imply superior batsmanship? The gap in reasoning here is that the connection between batting average and superior batting is not established. In order to be fully reasonable, this argument needs to be clear about the connection between a high batting average and superior batting. Let's look at another example. Since revenues from advertising are drying up, we can expect more newspapers to close down next year. The word since indicates that revenues from advertising are drying up is the reason. More newspapers will close down next year is the point or conclusion. Is there an unbroken logical connection between the reason, that is revenue from advertising, and the conclusion, which is business failure? The gap is clear if we identify correctly that advertising is only one source of newspaper revenues. The reason, the drop in revenues from a single source, need not always lead to the conclusion, that is business failure. There could be other, perhaps even larger sources of revenue. For example, newspaper subscriptions could be a larger source of revenue. In order to be fully reasonable, an argument needs to be clear on that point as well. To work, the argument needs to connect the reason to the conclusion. The argument can therefore be represented in this manner: a switch and a bulb that are not properly connected. To work, the argument needs to properly connect the reason to the conclusion. Now, let's add another reason. 80% of newspaper revenues in the last decade came from advertising. This new reason correctly connects the first reason about drop in advertising revenues to the conclusion about business failure, by pointing out the contribution of revenues from advertising. If we add this reason, it becomes another switch, connecting the reason to the conclusion. These two reasons will be switches in a series because they rely on each other. This analysis showed us how a gap in reasoning can be identified and then filled by the introduction of another reason. Let us look at another statement. I live in Delhi and I don't feel any discomfort in breathing. Air pollution in Delhi is a myth. The conclusion here is air pollution in Delhi is a myth. The reason is there is no discomfort in breathing. Is this a reasonable argument? Is the absence of discomfort, which is a subjective feeling, sufficient evidence of clean air which can be measured? The argument does not explicitly make the connection between discomfort and pollution. Because the connection between the reason and the point is not made, there is a gap in reasoning. Idlis are a healthy snack because no oil is used to make them. Is this a reasonable argument? The reason in this argument only talks about an ingredient that is not used in making idlis. What about the ingredients that are actually used? Are they healthy? The argument does not speak about it, and therefore there is the gap. Santosh is not very expressive. I don't think he will be a good choice for the president of the club. The reason in this argument mentions a quality that Santosh does not have. It does not state that this particular quality is essential in a club president. This is a gap in the argument. Now, don't get me wrong, most of these arguments are perfectly all right in everyday conversation. Some of them only rely on assumptions that we may ordinarily regard as self-evident. But what we are doing here is not about everyday conversation. We are trying to systematically explain the reasonableness of arguments, first by understanding their structure, and then by searching for gaps in the logical connection between the reasons and the conclusion. And this is a system that you can apply to nearly any text. If a politician is making a speech in Parliament, ask yourself, what is the point? What are the reasons in support? What is the relationship between these reasons? Are they switches in parallel or switches in a series? And finally, are there gaps in reasoning? You could also do it with newspaper editorials, sermons from your parents, or even cricket commentary. Now let's apply these lessons to another text. One of the most inflammatory arguments against abortion is rooted in the assertion that the fetus can feel pain and that termination is therefore a brutal affair. This is extremely unlikely to be true. A fetus in the early stages of development lacks the developed nervous system and brain to feel pain or even be aware of their surroundings. The neuroanatomical apparatus required for pain and sensation is not complete until about 26 weeks into pregnancy. As the upper limit worldwide for termination is 24 weeks, and the vast majority of pregnancies are terminated well before this, most in the first 9 weeks in the UK, the question of fetal pain is a complete red herring. This is reflected in the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists' report on fetal pain, which concludes, existing data suggests that cortical processing and therefore fetal perception of pain cannot occur before 24 weeks of gestation. The passage is obviously in response to another argument, the argument that abortion is brutal because the fetus can feel pain. And that argument is part of larger arguments about the morality and legality of abortion. The larger conclusion that abortion is immoral or that abortion should be banned is thus supported by the reason that abortion causes pain to be felt by the fetus. This could perhaps be represented in this fashion. There may be other reasons that are alternate or concurrent to the reason that the fetus feels pain, but we don't know that. In fact, the argument may even be phrased in such a way that the reason that the fetus feels pain is a necessary one to conclude that abortion is immoral or that it should be banned. This is the reasoning structure that the passage we read is trying to attack. How does it do that? Let's read the passage again. What's the point? The point is the fetus cannot feel pain. What's the support? The support is that a fetus does not have the nervous system necessary to feel pain. The passage also presents some evidence from experts in support of this argument. This argument has shown that one of the switches in another argument should be turned off. By showing that one of the switches regulating the flow of electric current to the bulb is actually turned off, it threatens the soundness of the entire reasoning structure. The argument that relies on the reason that pain is caused to the fetus to conclude that abortion is immoral has been shown to be unreasonable. This is another example of how, by first taking an argument apart into its constituent parts, the reasons and the conclusion, and then by examining the relationships among the reasons and between each reason and the conclusion, we can test the reasonableness of the argument. Remember this method. The first step, obviously, is to read the text carefully. After that, identify the conclusion. Ask yourself, what is the point? Look for clues. Words such as therefore, hence, so, and it follows are almost always used in relation to a conclusion. Thirdly, identify the different reasons that have been offered in support of the conclusion. Fourthly, find out the relationship between the reasons. Alternate or concurrent? Are they switches in parallel or switches in a series? That is, do they work independent of each other or do they depend on each other? Finally, look at the gaps in reasoning. Examine the connection between each reason and its conclusion and look for gaps. With this, we come to the end of this video. Remember these 5 steps. We broke text down into its constituent reasons and conclusion and examined the relationship between them to identify gaps in reasoning. With that, we crossed an important milestone in learning how to reason correctly. In the next video, we will see the other side of reasoning. We will learn how to correctly arrive at conclusions using reasoning. Thank you for watching.